Okay, let's get going. It is the top of the hour. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad that you are here. So this session is about MBA application strategies, specifically for non-traditional candidates. So I'm very passionate about working with non-traditional candidates and helping them find their way in the MBA application process throughout business school and beyond, because I was in your shoes one day. So hopefully what follows gives you some ideas on how you can approach this process. So before we dive into the agenda, I'll give you a little more information about myself. My name is Laura Nelson. I have a BFA from Carnegie Mellon University, where I studied art, and I'm also a full-time graduate of the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan, where I was a member of the admissions committee. Before business school, I worked in film and television. I had a very nonlinear path going into business school and coming out of school. Then following graduation, I have worked in tech for the last 15 years. I've held general management roles and more recently was VP of marketing at a software startup. My last two companies exited through acquisition. I've also been an MBA admissions consultant, though, for 16 years with two of the top consulting firms and now with TTP. And the last thing I want to mention is I'm a member of an organization called AGAC, which has a rigorous vetting process for admissions consultants. So every year I take part in ongoing programming with this organization and interact with admissions directors at top MBA programs. I have an annual conference to attend next month. It is a week long, and as part of that, I'll be visiting with Haas, Stanford, and Anderson, or sorry, visiting those campuses and catching up with at least 25 directors of admission. So I'm really looking forward to bringing that insight to you all in a feature session. Over the last 15 years, I've worked on almost every program imaginable, including full-time, part-time, online, executive, and dual degree applications at top programs like these on this slide, along with many others that aren't represented here. So enough about me. I'd love to learn where you all are coming from. So I'll give you a moment to type that into the chat. But if you could share like what career path you are on now and what you're hoping to do post MBA, that will give me an understanding of who's in the room tonight. So feel free to use that chat feature in Zoom. Army officer, great. I've worked with numerous military candidates. Biotech to management consulting in pharmaceuticals. That's cool. Alrighty, some good diversity and backgrounds here, which is great. So feel free to use the chat throughout. I will try to keep an eye on it, but in case I don't, we will have Q&A at the end. Please feel free to ask your questions again. Before I dive into the agenda, some more answers on careers. This is great. Higher ed and pivot into management consulting, awesome. Maybe interested in analytics, engineering and automotive industry, going into consulting. So it looks like a lot of interest in consulting, which is great. So before I dive into the agenda today, I want to pause and reflect on this journey you're about to embark on with your MBA applications. The process for pursuing an MBA, it's so much more than just putting together an application and sending it off into the ether. It really does require some self-reflection, evaluation, discovery, and more, but also incorporate some risk too. So you all are here today because you want to embrace the challenges that come from the process of applying for and pursuing an MBA and ultimately changing your career. These are big career shifts that you're talking about here tonight. You're also pursuing an opportunity to grow in multifaceted ways. So I really understand this challenge, and I'm here to support you in taking this leap to embark on what I hope is a transformational experience for you all. So with that in mind, let's dive into today's agenda. Here are the things that I plan to cover. So first, we're going to identify a few classic myths about MBA student profiles. And then we are going to use class profile data to really understand who's in these MBA cohorts, in these top MBA programs. Next, we're going to take a look at some of the common challenges that traditional candidates, or sorry, I should say non-traditional candidates face as part of this process. Then I'm going to walk through a couple quick exercises. These are things that you can do after tonight's session to help articulate your career goals post-MBA. So this is a really important part of any candidate's application process, but it's especially true for non-traditional candidates like you guys. Then I'm going to highlight some examples of non-traditional candidates I've worked with. So I'll talk about what they studied, their pre-MBA careers, what careers they targeted, and which programs that they landed in. And at the end, I will leave time for Q&A. So as I mentioned, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat while we move along, but it's not always easy to respond to everything. So if I miss anything, feel free to ask again at the end. So let's get started. I want to talk first about these classic myths about MBA candidates and who goes to business school in general. So you might think that there's an element of sameness across many of these top MBA programs and that admissions committees are looking for something very specific that falls into line. However, I'm going to share the data to help debunk some of these classic myths, including what's on the next page, right? So these are some of the classic myths, right? These myths include the fact that MBAs are for people who have business degrees from undergrad, right? You might think MBAs are for people who have business jobs and business careers. You may think that people who are executives and in managerial roles are appropriate for business school, right? You may believe that MBAs are for people who are in quant and analytical roles. And you may believe that people who are in male-dominated industries or are mostly male are, the right archetype for business school. And because you're here tonight, I'm thinking that you don't buy into all of this, all of these classic myths. But what I'm going to do is address these one by one using real data from MBA class profiles at top programs to debunk each one of these, right? If you are not familiar with how to find class profiles, here's a quick tip. So you can Google class profile and the name of your MBA program. Be sure to include the word MBA, and you'll be able to find that. It should come up as one of your first results. Like, here's an example from Booth. So let's get back to those classic myths, right? Starting with where people are coming from, their undergrad majors. So for each of these examples, I'm going to look at two programs among the top MBAs and just talk a little bit about the data that we're seeing here. So here, for both Yale and Stern, you can see a mix of degrees represented in these cohorts. And this is the data from the most recent class. So this would be the class that matriculated in 2024, right? You can see a mix of degrees represented in Yale and Stern, as I mentioned. Yale, you can see has a large chunk of candidates with backgrounds in humanities and social sciences, in addition to STEM backgrounds. And then at Stern, there's a similar mix. And while it's true the largest chunk of the cohort comes in with a business degree, there is strong representation of candidates with social sciences, humanities, and arts degrees too. So if you are worried that you don't have a business degree, hopefully charts like this help to put you at ease about this process. So that's degrees. Next, we're going to take a look at pre-MBA careers. So not everyone is coming from a business job, and I certainly see that's true for everyone in this room today. So let's take a closer look at Berkeley, Haas, and Kellogg. So for Haas, there's a diverse mix of industries across traditional business functions, along with not so traditional business functions like government, energy, and not-for-profit. So It's a very diverse class in terms of that pre-MBA experience. I think Kellogg has a similar mix here on the right. There's a good chunk of students from social sciences. Sorry, that was from the degrees rather. There's a good chunk of students from, government, military, media, consumer products, energy that helps to like round out the class. So, any of you who are not currently in like a consulting or finance or traditional MBA career, hopefully these charts like help to put you at ease too, because there will be classmates coming in from all sorts of careers. So next we're going to talk about work experience, which I'm going to use like years of work experience as a proxy for. Fuqua's latest class has an average years of 6 for the work experience, right? The average age is 29. So, typically at this point in someone's career, they're not in like a big executive or managerial role with a huge team, though this really does depend on the company. And you'll see on the right, like they share both the average and the median, along with the 80% range. And you can see quite a range from like 3.3 to 8.5 years of experience, right? Of course, keep in mind there's averages, medians, and here with Darden we have a range, but if you are worried that you don't have a big title or a big team to manage, please don't. So more often than not, I work with clients who are individual contributors to their companies and in their roles, and that really is more the norm than you think going into an MBA. So next, I'm going to talk about this perception of quant jocks and analytical capabilities and test scores. So tests are just one way to assess a person's capabilities, but of course, they're not the only way. So sometimes we look to test scores just to see how, what students' potential is and how they performed. And, this is just an equalizer, across cohorts and programs. So Columbia Business School, or CBS, on the left side shares the average total range of scores and like the middle 80% for the GMAT. And you can see that the total range is quite broad, right? Conversely, Ross on the right, like you see averages for the GMAT and for the GRE sections. You see a middle 80% for the GMAT, but they don't quite share the same data. Additionally, there's another test that CBS, along with a handful of programs, accepts called the executive assessment. Some MBA programs will accept this shorter test for their program, and sometimes they don't publish the range for that particular test. On the topic of testing, though, I get this question a lot. Will I be dinged if I don't take the GMAT? And the answer is no, you will not be dinged. My recommendation is that you take the test that best suits your abilities and the one that you're going to score the highest on. That's going to ensure that you are the most competitive for your target MBA programs. So if it's not the GMAT, focus on the GRE or the EA if your school accepts that. I have plenty of successful clients who have taken the GRE or the EA. So if you worried that the score isn't the strongest facet of the application, remember that the admissions committee is going to review all parts of your application, and they're really going to consider your candidacy holistically. So your test score is just one component of a greater application. The last point I want to address here with the class profile data is gender representation. So in the past, MBA programs used to be totally dominated by men, but that's not the case anymore. So the numbers have been growing steadily year after year for women. The class composition at Wharton is closing in on gender parity with 40% women in the most recent class. I believe they hit 50% a couple years ago, so they haven't been consistent with that in more recent years, but this is kind of consistent on what we see across top programs today. Obviously Sloan on the right is closer with 49% women in its most recent class. So if you are a female applicant, I wouldn't despair. MBA programs are looking for more of you. That's not to say it's like automatically going to get you in or that's going to be easier to get in, but simply just to say that you shouldn't let your gender hold you back, for an MBA program. So that's kind of a brief summary of some of the class profile data that I think helps to dispel some of the commonly held misperceptions about the MBA degree, about business school, and hopefully it helps you calibrate your own scores, grades, characteristics, and more to your target MBA programs. Because like people from all walks of life can find their paths in business school and be successful. And I'm just one example of that. But the ultimate goal of these programs really is to create the most dynamic, diverse, and interesting cohorts possible. And you folks, especially from non-traditional backgrounds, go a long way to building that dynamic that they want in the cohort. Okay. So we talked about the commonly held misperceptions and what the data reveals. I want to move along to some of the common challenges for non-traditional candidates applying to MBA programs and address how you can overcome them. So we've discussed that the class profile attracts all types, and these are some of the common challenges we see time and again. As a non-traditional candidate, you need to ensure that you have an understanding of how the MBA is going to serve your career objectives. So are you making an intentional choice or are you hiding from an uncertain job market? You just want to make sure that you're running towards something rather than away from something else, okay? The second point here is that you need a hypothesis on how you're going to pursue your goals. So this involves the MBA curriculum and specific aspects of the program, and also a plan for how you're going to work through these. Next, you need to just demonstrate that you are up to the task academically. So the competition is fierce, especially among the top MBA programs. And if your transcripts don't reflect a success story, you're going to have to employ other tools to show that you're ready for the academic course. And then the final point I'll make here is, you need to specifically exhibit quant capabilities. So it is okay if you haven't taken quant courses since undergrad or even in high school. There are other opportunities to show that, you have quant capabilities and you have an analytical mind. So I'm going to go through these one by one. And I know these slides are really wordy, so I'm not going to belabor every point. But you really have to consider the MBA in terms of your growth objectives. So notice I didn't just say career here, but the MBA is a real opportunity for professional, developmental, and personal growth. And if you're applying for an MBA, like these objectives need to be really clear, right? This is going to involve some networking. It's going to involve some research. It's going to involve understanding where you are today and what you need to make that leap to, say, management consulting, if that's your goal, right? You've got to then develop a list of, types of companies to target. So on the theme of consulting, are you going to target the MBB firms? Are you going to look at mid-tier boutique consulting firms? Like now is the time we're going to shape up, what type of company you're targeting. And of course, like the process of networking is, continuous. It starts before you go to business school, and now is a great time to get that process going if you haven't started already. Okay. So I know a lot of words here. Feel free to take screenshots as we go along, but those are the specific points I wanted to hammer home here on, how this MBA facilitates your career change. Next, I'm talking specifically here about, the career change I misspoke about the career change on the last slide, but here is about, tying the MBA into your career goals, right? Um, you're going to have time to discover new things when you get to school, but take note that recruiting starts as soon as you get to campus. And, if you have access through special programs like Forte or the consortium, you might be recruiting this summer before you even start. So this is again like just reinforcing the point that the intentionality and the pursuit of your goals is like really important to your process and will express itself in many ways throughout your application. I will acknowledge though that these applications are all different, right? Some applications are, they really dig into the goals and really want to understand why that school will facilitate the pursuit of your goals. But there are others like, MIT Sloan's a great example that doesn't belabor this, right? Their cover letter does not ask about this. And we don't know if that's going to be the same for next year, but if the application materials don't ask about this, like certainly your interview will. So, be prepared for this to come up somewhere in your process if it's not in your essay materials. The next couple slides are just expanding on your academic readiness. So as much as the MBA is a career and developmental experience, it is also an academic degree. So you've got to prove that readiness, right? Hopefully it's enforced by your undergrad transcript or your grad transcript if you already have a grad degree. But there are other things that you can do to offset, any missteps in your prior academic career, right? I would say if you have not seen your transcript in a while, make sure you request that so you can review it ASAP. If it's been a while, you might not remember, certain courses or, a fluke grade, and it's good to get eyes on that now earlier in the process than, when it's too late to do something about that. If you have D's and F's in your transcript, you might have to address them in the optional essay. If you don't have quant coursework, you might consider taking a course or two from extension programs. I've listed a couple examples here. These serve a dual purpose in that you can get an A that you can submit to the admissions committee, but you can also use them as a refresher on concepts before you enroll in the MBA. So, many of us haven't been in school for a while prior to enrolling in the MBA, so that can be helpful. A big part of this process too, of course, is, emphasizing what is transferable to your future career. So, again, these just all reinforce like your readiness for, the academic side of the MBA. And the next slide kind of hones in on, quantitative concepts. So again, I bring up the course as a suggestion if, that's an area in your profile where you may need help. Certainly ensuring that your score is in line, at or above the average in your target MBA programs. And, anywhere you can ensure that your analytical or quant capabilities can be expressed. I will say, don't feel like you've got to overdo it if this is not the case for you. But, if you do have true quant and analytical components to your role, make sure they shine through on your resume. So I know that is a lot of information here about covering perceived weaknesses in the non-traditional candidate profile, but I spent time on there because this is where I spend a lot of time with my non-traditional MBA applicants. And I think it's really important to understand where your opportunity areas are and what you can do ahead of time to ensure that your application is in its strongest place so that you feel good when you're submitting and putting your best foot forward in the process. Because really, like the admissions committee again, they're not trying to seek cookie cutter candidates. And you saw the diversity in the classes, I showed a few slides ago, but as much as these are academic programs and they showcase professional diversity, they are looking for people who are ambitious, people who are ready to innovate, and people who are actively engaged and ready to bring that energy to campus too. So your effort to stand out and shine often incorporates your goals, but I want to make sure that it doesn't, dull what makes you really special in this process. So moving on, I want to get to a few of the actual tactical things you can think about as you make the case for an MBA. And to set that up, I'm going to talk about the MBA as a bridge to your future. I talk about this transformation often because I truly believe that this is what makes the MBA candidates, this is what most MBA candidates undergo over the span of 2 years. I'm going to talk about how to construct one facet of your career narrative, as I think that's a challenging part of the application process. And I think the photo kind of just gives us a strong sense of this objective, right? We are here where we are, before this bridge, right? On the left side, and you're using the MBA as a mechanism to get to somewhere hopefully better, right? So I'm going to walk through a couple exercises. And again, these are things that you can do in the coming days and weeks as you prepare your candidacy. And by doing the groundwork ahead of time, you'll be in a great spot to tackle the applications when they open. So I expect many of them to open sometime next month, and the remainder in June. And that should give you enough time to tackle those and be in good shape to submit either in round 1 or round 2. So let's talk about career goals. These are going to help you, or sorry, these exercises are going to help you just really articulate, the why behind, this transition you are making and what transferable skills you are going to bring. So the first exercise, you can just screenshot this and, complete the Mad Libs exercise. This just simply describes where you are today in terms of your career and where you want to be. It is going to form the basis of your elevator pitch and a one-line response in a video interview or a live interview, but it's also going to pop up in other areas of your application too. So that's a simple exercise here. The next exercise is about getting tactical on what type of job you want to pursue. So I have just an example here of a rotational program at SC Johnson. It is specifically for MBA grads, but I encourage you to just put yourself in the shoes of a job seeker and start looking for that job you want to have, because I think it's useful to see, what are the requirements, right? What are the responsibilities that they're looking for someone in this role? What are the requirements in terms of the experience that you bring? And then you can start to fill in the gaps, right? You can ask yourself, which of these skills and experiences do I have? Which ones of them do I need? And, how is the MBA going to be that bridge, to help me get these skills and or experiences? And then the last question is kind of why this school, right? Which specific courses, programs, extracurriculars, and other, parts of the MBA experience are going to help facilitate that goal. If you do some of this work up front, you're going to save yourself a ton of time when it comes to articulating this as part of your application. And again, it'll be short answers, it'll be essays, it'll certainly be in your interview. It kind of just depends on the program. And, this is going to help you tackle some of the, bigger questions too, right? And the broader questions of that post MBA goal in the short term, why that program, why you're well suited for it. So I know that was quick and dirty, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of framework for talking about your post MBA goals and the questions that you should be asking yourselves as you kind of refine why those goals and how the MBA program will help you achieve them. So last thing, before I get into the Q&A, I want to highlight some non-traditional candidate success stories. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, I've worked with hundreds of candidates over the years, and many of them come from backgrounds similar to yours. And I'm going to showcase just a few recent success stories. And these are not their real names, but they all have kind of interesting and different paths into business school. So the first example is Cassie. She had an international relations degree and also studied social anthropology. So it's very interesting, but as you may not have noticed, it's not a business degree. Her background working as a press wrangler in the first Trump administration, and then in crisis communications really set her apart. She wrote about pivoting her career into social enterprise, and she graduated from CBS last year. That's one example. Another example, Connor, he actually, in fact, did have an undergrad degree in business, and he did well. But his career took a lot of turns from there. So he owned several ice cream shops. He became a serial entrepreneur with a range of unrelated businesses, and then decided he wanted to leverage the MBA experience and make a change and pursue consulting. So right now he's just finishing his second year at Fuqua. Got another example, Andrea. She studied media and communications in undergrad and led a career in brand management at a major cosmetic company. She did write about pivoting into alternate reality and virtual reality tech, and she is just finishing up at HBS. So her career path may be a little more, conventional in terms of an MBA title, but her background really wasn't. And then finally, an Army veteran, Blake. He had a background in biology and engineering, or I should say his degrees were in those subjects. And he pursued an MBA to leave the military and join the private sector. He is in his second year at Ross, pursuing his dream in pro sports, specifically in biz ops and analytics. And he did a summer internship last year with a minor league baseball team. So that was exciting to see. These are just a few of the ways that non-traditional candidates have leveraged the MBA experience to make a change, just like the ones that you are about to do. So I will take a breath here. And, as you think of them, just pop them into the chat. I will get to as many as possible. We can talk about things that, I presented on the prior slides or any questions at all that you have about the application process. And, I do have my contact info here as well. If you would like to connect for a free consult and talk in detail about your goals or anything pertaining to your strategy, you can reach me directly. So yeah, I'll pause there. Quiet group tonight. A good question. Um, so this question is about specific advice for someone coming from a research academia background. Definitely you have no problems standing out in the process. I think, it really kind of depends, Jacob, on what you want to do and where you want to do it. So I think, I mentioned transferable skills and intentionality as, part of this process. I think that will be important to you, right? My guess is that you'll be comfortable in the academic environment, which, will be a bigger jump for people coming, back from a corporate background. But it does depend on, what you're wanting to do in the future. And then, then you can make a little more, explicit of a link from, where you are today and what transfers to the future. So question on demonstrating quant ability. The question is, what score percentile would you say sets you apart from the rest of the applicants? It depends on the program. So Tristan, I would recommend to you that, take a look at those class profiles. By the time you apply, say for round one, there will be a new profile for the class of 2027, but I think you can use the class of 2026 as a proxy. Standout scores tend to be above average. So, I think that's like a good first step of, what are they looking for in terms of like what stands out? Take a look at where the average is today and, try to hit above that, particularly on the quant, since like that's what you asked. I do have people ask me, does that help to, um, offset GPA? And it does, right? Like if you didn't perform to your best of your ability in undergrad, but, you over index on the test, that does help your case from an admissions perspective. But good question. Sure, I'll just wait a couple more moments and, good question. So the question here is, does admission still put a huge emphasis on quant skill coming from a STEM background? Chiffon, good question. I think, if you are coming from a STEM background and, did well in your courses, did well in your professional career to date, demonstrated this, through your resume, through recommendations, through your test score, your transcript, whatever, it's less of a concern, right? Typically, and this is not true of everyone, but like typically STEM candidates do have that analytical background that business schools value. So, with the rigor of the training you've already been in academically and professionally, you're kind of already meeting that goal for demonstrating your quant and analytical skill. Sure. Well, thank you all so much for coming today. Again, take down my email address if you'd like to talk directly. I'd be happy to help and hope this was useful to some of you guys. I know it is a fire hose of information, but feel free to follow up if you have any questions, if anything was unclear, and have a great rest of your night. Question on the recording. Brooklyn, I believe it will be on our YouTube channel, but you should get it via email as well. If you don't get it in the next week or so, feel free to reach out. But good question.